So my name is Jonny Alexander. I'm a multidisciplinary artist based here in San Diego. I'm primarily a painter, and that kind of encompasses my studio work, which we'll get into a little bit later, my mural work, which you're seeing here now on the screen. And then towards the end of the slideshow, you'll see more about my commercial design work. I have a couple other facets to my practice that is installation art, which I might get into some images of that. And then I have a background in printmaking. So I grew up here in San Diego. It's where I started my art practice. But from there, I spent the majority of my 20s out of San Diego. So I moved to Northern California and went to Chico State. That's where I studied printmaking. I got my BFA in printmaking then. And then from there, I moved to Detroit, Michigan. I had an offer from an art publishing company called 1X Run, and they brought me on in 2014 to be their head screen printer. And I kind of co-directed their artist in residency program. I consider that a very formidable time in my art career. It's where I worked with artists from all around the world. I worked in a gallery, so I was seeing art coming in and out. All my friends were artists. Like a Friday night out was like going to a friend's studio and drinking wine and continuing to work on art. So that kind of that time in my life really helped to like set a foundation. Since then, I moved back to San Diego. It's been about 4 years now that I've been back here. And I'm now a living working artist, which is something that I've been trying to get to for a long time. So it feels good to have finally arrived at it. I'm currently based in North Park. And this last image on this slideshow is a mural that is at a development called the Jackson, which is on 30th Street. If you know the area, it's across the street from Vaughn's. I'm going to figure out how to exit this screen. And I'm going to jump into a different, slower slideshow. So getting into the topic at hand, my friends are probably going to laugh. Probably my roommate who's in the other room, maybe he's watching, he's going to laugh, but I'm going to quote Ram Dass. I probably talk about him way too much, but I think this is maybe an applicable little entry point for what I plan on talking about. So this is from a lecture called In the Face of Chaos. It was from 1994. And he says, quote, "It's extremely interesting to anticipate that this is not a stable situation, that it's going to change. And if you have a vested interest in holding it the same, you're going to be pushing against the change because the change is going to represent a threat to your existence. I would say that you and I are in training to find a place within ourselves and in the way we live our lives that we are not so dependent on the forms of existence that we freak when it changes." So I bring that up. I'm going to throw this on the screen. This is a painting of mine that I'll get to a little later, but basically in that quote, he's saying that things change, that uncertainty persists, and it's going to take a degree of equanimity or fluidity to kind of move through these changes. So when I was given the topic of liminal, I kind of had this, and this was part of that, the breakout conversations. I had this kind of negative connotation towards the word liminal. And I think it's because of my association with limbo, or this kind of space between that felt more stuck, or maybe it was rudderless, or more of like a state of stagnation. But as I started to read more about the definition and started to think about how it applies to my personal artwork, I started to kind of see it in a different light. And I saw more of a place of change or transition, or maybe a place for growth, to think of something that was like before and after, And maybe that liminal or liminality is maybe that flowing state that's in between the two. So with that kind of as a basis, I'm going to talk about liminal and then kind of in opposition to that, duality. So moving into my own artwork, in my artist statement, I talk about a perceived duality between humans and nature or the natural world. And within my images, I try to intertwine these domestic spaces and these natural spaces in an attempt to blur that perceived duality that we have. And kind of in doing that, I feel like I'm making these images that feel like maybe a liminal space or a transitional space. And when I talk about duality being this perceived thing, it's because I see us as being inescapably a part of nature. Any room that all of you are respectively sitting in is full of objects, and at one time or another, those objects were taken out of the ground or from the surface, and then they were processed, and now they're around you. I mean, stuff grows out of the ground and we put it into our mouth, and that's how we survive. So we cannot separate ourselves from it. So in this artwork, I'm trying to blur that boundary between maybe something that's seems so rooted and separate and showing this kind of like liminal state between the two. So I'm gonna just go through kind of quickly some images of my artwork. If something stands out, maybe in the Q&A if you want to ask me a question about a specific piece, but I'm going to start off with this painting. This is called Reasoning with Attachments. It's a 30 by 40 inch oil on canvas. It's actually hanging over my shoulder there. This, again, you can see this kind of separation or blurring of that separation between this kind of domestic space and then this natural environment. And then moving on, this is the other painting that's over this shoulder. This is a 30 by 40 inch oil on canvas. This is called The Tide of Rising Time. This piece, again, you're seeing these domesticated objects or this domestic objects set against this natural landscape. And if you think of that in my work as kind of the theater or the stage setting, these objects that occupy each image are kind of the actresses or the actors that then convey a certain message. So, and those are always interchanging. So with like the last piece that you were looking at, that one kind of deals more with like existential or personal things. This one is more geared towards like an environmental narrative. You can see the globe is sitting next to this hourglass, showing that our time is kind of running. If you get more into the books, that kind of drives that narrative. And then, of course, this is all being set in this scene of a place that either the water is rising or maybe the water is drying out. So it kind of has that narrative base, but it's maybe this liminal space between these like two things that we think are separate. This is another piece. Again, on the left-hand side is that domestic and natural space. This one is a kind of series I've been working with. So the image on the right is an abstraction of the image on the left, and you can kind of see that based in the colors and shapes that are used. And this is kind of messing around with our perception of things. This is another piece in that same vein. This was, I think, the first piece in this kind of series. It's called A Place in Perception. This is another one. It's called What We Create and What We Choose to Forget. So again, this is that play of domestic and natural spaces. This one, if you look into the little pink table in the living room, there's logs on the table and there's water or a pitcher of water in the fireplace. So that's kind of like a small reference to our mismanagement of resources. This is another diptych that I did that was at an exhibition at Good Faith Gallery, which is a gallery here in town run by my friend Tony Becker. This was another piece from that show called Gotten Myself into Self. This is a more recent piece that I really like and feels applicable to this. It is called After the Fire Comes Growth. So this is thinking about these transitional states and how they can lead to a kind of new growth or a new concept or a moving forward. I talked about some installation work. This was when I was doing a residency in Hilo, Hawaii. So this is, again, taking the same concept, but this is breaking it into an actual physical space. This is Aaron Glasson, a friend of mine, sitting there reading a book. He was one of the speakers previously on Creative Mornings. And then during that same residency, I built this faux living room setup. And then Aaron, who I showed before, helped me lug it into this tide pool. And this, again, is creating this kind of liminal space of these two things that we think are separate, but again, kind of making a statement about environmental issues and like sea level rise. I'm going to leave that on the screen, and I'm going to get back into a bit more of the this concept of liminality and duality. So throughout my art practice, I've had this kind of fascination with patterns in nature and how those patterns scale throughout nature. So one of my first recognitions of that is when I was younger, I remember dipping my paintbrush into a clean cup of water while painting, and seeing the paint or the ink kind of go into that, and seeing the swirling, like marbling pattern that water takes. I thought about that, and then I thought, okay, so how does that scale upwards? And I thought about looking at maps and the way that the ocean currents work around the continents and around the globe, and it takes that same form or that same shape as what I saw in my little water cup. And then to go like full Carl Sagan and go out even further and look at the galaxy that we live in, it takes this kind of spiraling shape. So thinking about these kind of laws in nature and how they scale throughout nature, and then kind of from taking that concept, I wanted to think about intangible things. And for the sake of this argument, I wanted to talk about like duality. So the concept or the idea of duality, how does that scale through our society or how we interact with the world? So I already talked about how we kind of separate ourselves from nature and think that it's out there and we're in here. But then I think about how we kind of do that with, like, the intellectual mind is the all-knowing, and then the body is kind of just the mechanism, and how we kind of separate the body from mind. And then how like me to you, like I'm me, I'm an individual, you're you, we separate ourselves from each other. And then, we're the human, that's the dog. Animals and humans are separate. And then this continues to scale through society where, this is our country, this is the border, that's their country. And then even scaling further, how our country uses resources, not being fully aware of where it's kind of being extracted or taken from. So again, this is kind of this like perpetuating separateness, things that are kind of rooted in one side or the other. And I think that it's a way that we understand the world, and I think it has its function, but I also think that that kind of duality or separation results in a lot of the disruptions that we find in the world. So I see it, pervasive in our politics, of course. I see it as the root of racism, the othering of another person. I see it in the basis of these immigration issues that we're having, where it's our country and you can't come in, type thing. It goes into socioeconomic, my money, not your money, and then ultimately into these environmental issues where the way that we consume and use things here, we're not fully connected or separated from where these things are coming in, and the kind of maybe environmental degradation that we're placing upon other places that are far away. So I see this all being based in this this separation. So to bring this all the way back around to liminal, if these concepts are kind of these separate things, then I'm starting to see liminal as this space in between, or this space where there's a potential for movement or growth, something that's not rooted in one or the other, but rather a transitional space. So if we think about kind of being rooted in one side or the other as an opposition, I'm kind of seeing liminal as something that's transitional. And ultimately, if we boil down our lives and if we really reduce the sauce of life down to what it is, I really think that we kind of live in a liminal space. We're constantly living within transition and flux. And, you know, the food that I ate is moving around in my guts, and the plant in my room that's drooping and I'm going to water it, it will stand back up. So these things that we think are so fixed and rooted are really still in a state of flux. Like my hair's going gray, my niece is getting older, our friendships change, our relationships change, family members come and go, and all these things. So I really kind of, if I'm really thinking about it, like liminality is kind of the state that we live in. So I want to say maybe like a claiming of that liminal space, or an owning of it, and thinking of it as a point of transition or change or growth. And I think that's ultimately where compassion comes in that understanding of each other, and not being so fixed on one or the other, but leaving room for that change to happen. So I guess, yeah, claiming that liminal space, but always remembering that we're continually a work in progress, and that change is going to always be there. But yeah, I talked a lot about a lot of things. I don't know if I made any solid points, but I want to say thank you for listening. So I appreciate it. And I think I stopped screen sharing now. Is that right? Is it done?
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you for sharing. I want to remind people to put their questions inside of the chat, because Stacy is going to introduce our next speaker. And I know there's things still bubbling, at least in my brain. I know there's other things that are bubbling in the community's brain after what you just spoke about, which was very phenomenal. So I'm going to let that bubble in myself and throw some of my questions that I had in there in the chat as well, so it can get other people's brains thinking too. But great job. I'll let Stacy do the introduction to our next speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Johnny.
Thanks.
I love that, Johnny. That was really wonderful. And I feel like you really made the concept of liminal a little bit more solid in our minds. I don't know. I mean, your paintings are like the exact expression of that word. So I feel like Mary is also really, you know, her paintings have to do with transitioning from these different places in our lives as well. So yeah, I'm just gonna let Mary jump right into it and tell us a little bit about herself and her work, and do your thing.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So I'm married Jhun. I was gonna say I was from, but I was born in the Philippines. I was born in Cavite. It's a very small province in the Philippines. I feel like I have to say that now because I didn't realize how many people are from that area that moved to San Diego. But I've always been into art ever since I was a kid. And a lot of the times that was also because of having an accent, and I was so like self-conscious about it. So I figured if I just drew and not talked, I felt like that was easier to sort of make friends. And that sort of way of communicating carried over as an adult, because even now I feel like such a hermit that it's hard for me to talk sometimes. So I think sending art out there is kind of just a way for me to be like, I'm still present, but you know, not really talking a lot. But I moved here when I was a kid, around like 7 years old, and I decided to go into art. As ever since I was a kid, I knew I wanted to do art somehow. First thought I wanted to be an art teacher, did not happen. Did not like it. Just like teaching others, I was like, no. But I think it's because I just was so excited to do it as a passion in general, and just kind of be in my own space to also learn how to sort of cope with my own life during the time. So I had to figure out what art meant to me. So when I went to college, I actually also dropped out of college. And I kind of like, for a second, I kind of thought I was like a quitter, but then I just realized that I was just so excited to just start a different journey, but still do art in the same amount of time and dedication. But I definitely found myself, from my early 20s, just kind of scrambling for books and scrambling to like see like every type of art, whether it was like architecture, cooking, or anything that I can bring back to the art that I was going to do, which I didn't realize was going to turn into more surrealist, like automatic work. And I should have known, because every time I grew up in National City and parts of downtown, I would like go often, where I would see street art all the time. So the method I sort of attached myself to was like the movement of street artists doing train monikers, like, you know, going into these places and leaving your mark without it actually having to, like, if someone can know you for just doing one thing, that was enough for me, because my whole thing was trying to understand how I can fit into, you know, like an artistic sort of crowd without actually having to use my voice. And leaving a mark was like perfect. It was like a symbol. So then that sort of transitioned to the girls that I do now, which I will screen share. Sorry, I'm new to this. Hold on. But that sort of takes us to here. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. So I'll just start. I'm just going to use my website. So can everybody see this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So as far as Liminal and my work, it actually is, I was telling everyone earlier that it's very much like I felt so related to it, because my art sort of consists of what is our relationship to this idea of life, death, and sort of the in-between spaces. And for me, I actually dove into that concept of death at a very young age. I came to America, and one of the reasons to do that was also because my aunt was passing away. And so I was very young when I first saw the relationship between flowers and death. And that was the first time I really, you know, had that full relationship to what nature is, like how nature takes over us. And that's pretty much has taken over the thesis of my work pretty much. So I'll kind of go into here. This is actually, I'm just going through the pages, but I sort of tried to understand my relationship to surrealism, and a lot of it was through the idea of constant coping, and sort of breaking my reality into things that I can see and find comfort in. And what I realized was I was drawing this girl ever since I was 15, which ultimately she is a metaphor for the vase of a feeling. And how can I tell the story of all of those feelings in through the color, the line, and how deep the roots can go within her. So I kind of looked at it as if it was 3 layers of therapy. And oh, actually, I kind of want to go over what surrealist automatism is. So the method I use is surrealist automatism. So that is when you're pretty much going with the flow, almost like seeing a dancer with a paintbrush. So 99% of my work does not involve a pencil. And it involves a lot of time in my head to let the emotions literally be self-induced in my whole mental scape. And then to the point where when my hands are ready, I just go. And so pieces can start and end within an hour, all the way to 3 hours. But most of the time it doesn't take more than a day, because I felt like my ultimate job was to convey this exact feeling. And how can I go from feeling it and then accepting it to surviving it? Most of these pieces are focused on death and my fear of death because of an early stage of seeing family die. And also one of my close art friends had passed away in my 20s. And sort of understanding what is my constant relationship to things that leave me. So going back to the liminal topic, I always felt that I was in a place of transition constantly, because if I am realistically alive, then I am still in that space of coping with my fear of dying. And so the way I kind of looked at art was, how can I find that healthy relationship where it's almost like I'm planting seeds and planting breadcrumbs, so I don't feel like, so it's almost like a reminder to everyone and myself that I'm still here. It's almost like a totem. I don't know if you guys watched Inception, but I feel like every time I make a piece and I see it, it almost tells me that I'm still here. And so it kind of acts like diaries. Let's see. So I'm gonna dive into, let's do this. Sorry for the scrolling. Let's see. Okay, so different mediums for me pretty much tell different stories. And the first mediums that you guys were seeing was acrylic. And a lot of that was like telling the stories of this feeling through the vibrant colors. But a lot of times when people come into my studio, I almost feel like I'm taking them out of their space and they're entering a new one. One, because the studio itself is very old, but two, they look at these drawings and they literally, like, I'll see someone get lost in it. And it's kind of like the best feeling, because I just stare at them and then they're like trying to figure out where they're at in the exact piece. And a lot of the times that is, for me, my goal is to, not necessarily for people to relate, but for them to question kind of their relationship to something, because I felt like art allowed me to question my relationship to the world in itself as a whole being alive. So this piece is called The Cabins, and it focuses on, I also have to mention that, like, when Jonny said dualities, it's kind of a nice topic that I'm going to go into, because a lot of the work that I have focuses on two faces. So in here, most of the time in the art, you'll see that there is a calm version and a distressed version. One that has a lot to do with acceptance and still this like conjuring fear. And two, it also, I have to point out that I am diagnosed bipolar. So a lot of the space in which I have to create is also dictated by the mood that I'm in. So I sort of accepted that all of the mood changes that I have is uncontrollable, but the way I could sort of conjure up something great is literally just to go and do work. And so it's almost like summoning magic. Like, if you're like, I've been watching a lot of Harry Potter, but it just feels like this internal energy where a lot of times the connotation behind being bipolar or having a fear of dying is so negative, or people want you to change that. It's something that I feel like, well, fuck, I feel like it's done me pretty well so far, so let me just keep going. So I just took that and sort of put it on a 2D sort of platform. But the girls are always there, even if they're hidden. Like I said, the girls first represent the exact sort of weight of the exact vase that I want the emotions to be carried. And a lot of times, if there are other beings with it, like animals and objects, a lot of them are sliced in different directions. And it kind of goes back to what Jonny was saying, was for me, it was on an emotional sense of our relationship to everything around us, and that no experience is detached from us. No, for me, it was inducing or like putting in the natural elements that is related to the story into my work, knowing that that is something that I want to sort of convey, that we are not detached from our own personal experiences and or things that happen that we see out there in the world. So I know it might be hard to zoom, but this is all found on my website, but if you ever get to zoom in, there's all of these stories in them. So then, let me see, sorry. So again, like I said, the different mediums kind of take us towards like different emotions, different sections of our minds. Even though there's always a girl, there's always nature sort of taking over, and nature taking over the girls, almost like the girls tend to look almost half skull like, half sculpture. The nature taking over is the metaphor of my constant need to cope with the fact that I will eventually either be back in the ground once again, or meet Earth in a different way, in a different time. So that has sort of taken over these little subjects. Like, this is all about coffee, but also I chose not to put eyes inside the girls that are profiles, a lot of the times because the emotion behind eyes are very strong. So I tend to just utilize the line work of a face to convey a universal feeling, especially because a lot of the times when people look at eyes, they don't associate with those eyes. But a lot of people associate with the line and the crevices of our face making an emotion. Like, we know when someone's stressed through just a simple quiver of like an eyebrow. We know that people are calm or worried just by the lines of their face. So that was something I wanted to emphasize. And just to go back into sort of the history of the girls, a lot of it was understanding my love for old films, like silent films, and old posters of women conveying a feeling without any words, sound, and color. So let's see. Sorry about that. Okay, so this one here, this is called Heritage 1, and it's in Washington right now in a house. And another form that I want to talk about in trying to find my space was, literally being in transition. This was sort of the liminal version of me trying to understand my heritage. So I'm Filipino, but I understand that, my last name is Chinese, which is my real last name is Dan Dan. But I had to question what it is to be Filipino, what it is to be from the Philippines. And so what are the roots of the Philippines, whether it be, do we have Chinese ancestors? Do we have Spanish ancestors? Do we have both? Do we have, and which part of China is my last name from? And all of these things. And so this was a piece that I was very proud of showing down in San Ysidro, and in my own studio space. And this sort of tells the story of, one, the colors of the Philippines. So I like, if we're talking about methods, I like to sort of understand the color of the moods first and the color of the actual point. So even though I'm a surrealist automatic painter, like I still have structure. So it's not necessarily you're just dancing. You kind of have a mental structure, but the goal is to just go with what you're doing. So it's literally like literal layers of the same feeling. And like I mentioned before, it's like layers of therapy. So I started off with the colors of red, yellow, and blue, and kind of putting them in pockets. And then I started doing, and first I was on scratch paper, like just kind of like meshing with colors. And then I went straight into the piece, just going for it. And I actually started this piece focusing on the face of what it, like turning the face 3/4, and which I hardly do. And for me, working in an automatic way, a lot of the times I actually figure out the work as like when I'm done. Like I figure out the point of the work when it's done, because a lot of times I'm just almost like painting throw up. I'm just, you know, just what do you call it? Expressing as I go. But then the structure is in my mind. So with this piece, I kind of just allowed the girls to sort of take me into their wing and understanding the stories I wanted to tell. Like there's a little bit of the Great Wall in there, plants that I've seen when I was also in China in 2014. And that's kind of why also I had to go to China, was because I wanted to just sort of understand that about myself as well. And also this kind of allowed me to sort of change up my direction as far as my flow. So I had to, since I was most of my 20s self-taught, I still had a lot to learn, and I still do. So a lot of it was going back to the old ways of painting and going and studying Chinese painting, studying how to make your own ink, which I do now with Chinese ink. I do the grinding of that. But and in that sort of way, and I have to speak on like my relationship with the word liminal constantly, because I always feel like I'm in a space of transitioning from old works and old ways of doing things and bringing it into new faces, because I still do the old stuff. Like I still grind my own Chinese ink. And so I love that sort of relationship of going back to the roots and going and understanding how that can sort of affect a modern way of painting. But if I were to sort of encompass this as a whole, oh, here, I'll just do a quick, oh yeah, you can see stories here. I will just do a quick run through here. And if you ever want to see the murals, it's kind of funny, but a lot of these are all gone, except for the North Park ones. But yes, here we go. Okay. But as far as something that I sort of want to convey and bringing it back was my idea of liminal as far as my work was liminal equaled coping through a transition. And the line that I always say in my work is home is where the mind is. I always felt that that was such a safe place for me to be in. And a lot of the times when you're kind of going through trauma, death, and feeling the stress, a lot of people want to get out of their heads. And I feel like since I enjoy being in my head and showing all of this work, I feel like that is my role as an artist, is to sort of take people out of their past and sort of have them just be at peace with the present and sort of like get lost in the art and try to understand where they fit moving forward in their own personal traumas, lives, through seeing artwork, through them either feeling inspired by just taking on the current state of their minds and saying, how am I feeling and what can I do about it? So if I were to leave us with some sort of encapsulating thought is, through the acceptance of what you're going through, is whether you're an artist or like a different type of artist or whatever you're doing, I think it's truly important to sort of find yourself in a place where you're doing your own personal therapy, as far as you're constantly making things, doing layers of therapy just by almost not regurgitating, but like almost like artistic throw up, because I think for me that sort of led to a more honest way of thinking about the world, whether it's kind of like what Jonny was mentioning, our relationship to nature as a whole and its sort of intrinsic value that we, for many of us, like take for granted, or for me personally, if you can go back to being honest, your work will not only be differentiated, but it will also stick out to so many people that feel that sort of way as well. And so I think understanding what a liminal space is in your life and in your transition, and really accepting it, sort of leads to honest art. Also, it leads to the clientele, as far as if I'm talking business, the clientele that you generally want, because a lot of the times you don't realize that people feel and do and feel through your work very honestly, and that's sort of how you get those the clientele that you look for, that is invested in your personal work and not just the work that you're doing for them. But yeah, I think that is as much as I can say. Let me see if this works. Oh. Am I back?
Yes.
Okay. See,
Yes,
I got
back.
so scared I was gonna get lost.
No, you got this. You're not in a liminal space or in between, although we're talking about liminal. And I just want to give a round of applause, like with the sound and everything. Even if they can't hear you, they can feel you with that clap and everything, or you can put the emojis on there. That was beautiful.